Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us here on what I think is a pretty special chance to hear from two people who have been directly involved in some pretty significant and recently published research. Welcome to those who are joining us here at Karaka today. I think it's a pretty healthy turnout, and also welcome to everyone who will be watching this online. We're going to video the session today, and it'll be available in the coming days after this session here. Look, on the eve of Ready to Run 2024 and right in the middle of the pre-sale inspection process, I think there's some key ambitions on both sides of the equation. I think from vendors, the hope that their horses are fairly assessed based on its X-ray findings, and also from the buyers who are looking to purchase a horse who is free from as many conformational issues as possible that would have the ability to affect how it performs on the racetrack. And we have the vets who sit in the middle of that process as the pivotal players. I think sales X-rays have been the subject of quite a lot of debate over a long period of time, and certainly in my view, I think research and factual information is a perfect sort of antidote to any subjectivity. So I think this is why this research is so important. Ultimately it studied 2,500 yearlings, it looked at 20,000 sesamoids, 5,000 stifles, and it's the culmination of 8 years of hard work and research, which therefore allows a highly evidence-based assessment of a young horse. I think equally important, and it's something I've noticed too, is we've got to make sure that vital pieces of research like this don't just become another piece of paper in a library of many research projects. I think referring to this on a daily basis and applying the grading system which has actually come out of this research will let vendors' horses ultimately be treated more fairly and a buyer to purchase with more scope and confidence. So that's the aim of today, and a few other endeavours will be undertaken in the next couple of months. So I'd just like to firstly thank and introduce the two people who played such a massive role in this research who are alongside me today, Dr. Francis Peat and Dr. Dave Keenan. Francis, we'll start with you. Welcome and thank you for giving up your time in this way. Just introduce yourself and just let us know a little bit of how you became involved in this research.
Sure. Thank you very much, Nick, and thank you from us both for the opportunity to speak today. So I'm Francis Peat. I practiced as an equine vet in Matamata for 5 years and subsequently spent most of the last 10 years overseas, primarily in the States, doing my specialist training. My clinical field is sports medicine and rehabilitation, so poor performance, lameness, lots of diagnostic imaging, and also did a PhD in pre-sale imaging and thoroughbreds while I was there, so that's this work was a large part of that. My involvement at Karaka, I was just thinking, I first worked for New Zealand Bloodstock about 20 years ago as a scope holder, as a student in my university holidays, and for the last 15 years have been doing sales radiology work, and have a fair interest in that. I'll pass over to Dave and he can introduce himself as well.
Thanks, Francis. Thanks for the introduction, Nick. Dave Keenan, I'm at Matamata Vets. Been there since the mid-90s, been attending the sales and involved in all the processes since that time. I was invited to be a part of the research project by Francis and the other authors, and I was pretty happy to be a part of that to contribute to try and put some science and more science into that process. So I'm pretty pleased to be at this end of the game, whereby we're now 8 years later, there's some real science to put in front of everybody and help with the process in the sales. So yeah, pleased to be able to get to this stage.
Good, and it's great to have you here. Look, it must be said, this is a huge project that's sort of split into 4 research papers, so we couldn't possibly hope to cover anywhere near the full findings of the research in the hour we've got allotted. We'll pay particular attention to 2 of these research projects, but I hope from today it'll let people learn the sort of outlines of what's been done and spark conversation with the ultimate goal of having this research applied in the field. So what we'll do is, in a short moment, we'll hear from Francis. Francis will give us a presentation which just sort of rounds up this research and the key findings from it. From there, Dave, Francis and I will sort of break away into sort of expanding and talking about some of the things that have come from it, and then at the end we'll allow the opportunity for anybody in the audience to ask any questions that's specific to this research. So without further ado, Francis, I'll pass over to you to sort of expand on the research and tell us what it's all about. So thank you.
Thanks, Nick. So as Nick said, the aim of today isn't to give you every detail about this work, but to touch on the key points in 2 X-ray papers that have been published over the last year that are a result of this body of research. So just to start, obviously X-ray repositories have been around for a while now. They were initiated in the 1990s, and the aim was to contribute positively to the sales process, to assist with decision making, particularly regarding predicting the orthopaedic soundness of horses in conjunction with a buyer's given risk tolerance. The least positive outcome of sales repositories is where we have certain X-ray findings that are deemed an increased risk without sufficient evidence to back that up. Some of these instances can drastically weaken the marketplace and negatively impact the whole industry. So one of the reasons for embarking on this study was to try and help address that by providing more evidence that we just didn't have previously. It was undertaken in the States, and we were fortunate to have the buy-in of many key players in the sales industry over there, including the likes of Mark Taylor at TaylorMade Sales, one of the largest yearling consigners in the world. As soon as we started talking about this work to people over there, to the Consigners and Breeders Association, there was a huge amount of support for it, and without that, we couldn't have done any of it. It was a large undertaking by considerable efforts from many people. The core research group, myself, Dave Keenan, also included Dr. Wayne McElraith, who is a New Zealander who's spent most of his career in the States. Also Dr. Chris Kowchak and Dr. Jeff Burke. A number of other people that were important were vets from Kentucky and the United States that had done previous sales X-ray work, and discussions, collaborations with them produced the quality of the work that we ended up with as well. We had buy-in from the 3 major sales companies in the States, Keeneland, Fasig-Tipton and Ocala Breeders Sales Company, as well as the Consigners and Breeders Association, a funding grant from Grace and Jockey Club Research Foundation, as well as private donations from many people within the industry who were keen to support this work, and the sales companies themselves backed it, both word of mouth and supported it financially. They saw the value in doing it. So just to go back, I guess, to sitting in the repository here 15 years ago, one of the things that we're blessed with over the last 20 years is the advances in X-ray technology. So those allow us to see much more detail on X-rays. With that higher resolution and picking up more subtle findings requires us to actually have the evidence to know what those subtle findings mean. So for instance, in a stifle here, looking at this aspect of the femur with increased resolution, we start to see things like this shallow lucency on the edge of the stifle here. Sitting in the repository, wondering what exactly this means for the future of the horse. Is it going to get worse? Is it going to impact the horse's racing career or longevity? So heading to the States, had an opportunity to work with some key research veterinarians to answer these questions. So that's what we attempted to do. The study Nick mentioned focuses on two key areas, stifles and sesamoid bones. For each of these, first of all, we looked at how commonly do we see the range of findings in each of these areas. Then we looked at do the findings improve or worsen over time, particularly between yearling sale age and 2-year-old sale age. Then thirdly, we looked at how important are each grade of those findings to future racing performance for the horse. And from that, we've produced some evidence which will help our recommendations for interpretation of these findings at sales. So the key thing really with these is, do they become problematic as the horse enters training, and how might they influence racing performance? We looked at a number of measures of racing performance. First of all, does the horse make it to the races at all? So does the horse start at least one race? And from there, some other variables to do with earnings and classes of start, things like that. So in terms of numbers, we enrolled just over 2,500 yearlings from the Keeneland Sale in Kentucky, and 436 of those horses subsequently presented to sale again as a 2-year-old the following year. So there are 5 major 2-year-old sales in the States, held by Fasek-Tipton and Ocala breeders' sales. So any of those 2,500 yearlings that represented for sale as a 2-year-old, and the consignors were willing to let us enrol the horse in the second phase of the study, were included again. Now, just before we get into X-ray findings, the first real finding to note is that even before looking at X-rays, just overall, 85% of these sales yearlings in the study raced at least once by the end of their 4-year-old season. So that's a number to keep in mind. 85% of the yearlings made it to the races, meaning 15% or 1 in 7 yearlings didn't make it to the races, just as a blanket overall figure, regardless of X-ray findings. To start with, we'll touch on stifles, and so I alluded to these earlier. What we're looking at with stifles, and you may have come across these terms yourselves, lucencies and or cysts in the stifle. So cysts here in this aspect of the femur, and then what they can look like inside the joint as an opening into the cyst. On X-rays, we graded these and we grouped them into 3 groups in order to establish the importance of the various depths of lucency that we see. So grade 1s are shallow, just this dark shallow area here, up to 3 millimetres deep but no deeper. Grade 2s, more of a dome-shaped lucency that extends through the subchondral bone plate deeper into the condyle, and these can vary in depth. And then grade 3 is your classic cyst, large lucency within the condyle. There is a 4th group that we used to worry about, and that is simply just flattening of the condyle. So no dark spot, just sort of flattening of this area. For the purposes of this study and going forward, we considered flattening to be normal, so we don't actually even write that down anymore, so that's one less thing to go on your X-ray reports. But these are the 3 key groups we looked at. So first of all, how common are these findings? Essentially, if you've had at least 10 horses through the sales, there's a good chance that you've dealt with the term stifle lucency or cyst, and that's because overall 1 in 10 sales horses have a stifle lucency of some degree. So broken down, the majority of those are the shallow grade 1 lucencies. So in our study from 5,000 yearling stifles, 7% of those had a grade 1 lucency. For the 900 2-year-old stifles we looked at, the number was about the same, about 7%. As we get to the more severe grade 2 deeper lucencies, the prevalence of those was 2 to 3%, and just 1% of horses presented at sale had a grade 3 lucency or your classic stifle cyst. The question as to whether these improve or worsen between yearling and 2-year-old sale age was looked at. So of horses that had a grade 1 shallow lucency at a yearling sale, 80% of those either improved to a grade 0 by the time they're presented as a 2-year-old or remained a grade 1 shallow lucency. About 20% of them progressed 1 grade to a grade 2. Of ones that started off as a grade 2 as yearlings, 20% of those improved to a grade 1 and 60% remained at a grade 2. So again, we're left with about 20% of them that progressed further, in this case to a grade 3. So it's about the same for both. Approximately 20% will get worse by 1 grade in horses that present at sales at both ages. This is also evidence that it's possible to improve 1 grade between sales because of the drop down from grade 1 to grade 0 or from grade 2 to grade 1 that we saw in a large number of horses. Then briefly to the question about, do these lucencies affect racing? Do we need to worry about them at all? What the results showed was that for grade 3, so for the cysts that are present in yearlings at sale, the probability of racing for those horses was 78%. And if we remember back to that original baseline figure of 85% of yearlings making it to the races, most people would say that's a clinically important difference. So rather than it being a 1 in 7 chance that the horse on average won't make it to the races, 1 in 5 of these yearlings that have a stifle cyst did not make it to the races at all before they were 5, and we could assume never did. Obviously that means that 4 out of 5 of them actually did make it to the races, and I'm sure there's a number of people in this room who will have in mind a horse that they know had a stifle cyst and raced or even raced well. So some objective data as to how much a cyst changes the probability of a horse racing. For the horses with a cyst as a yearling that did make it to the races, there was no evidence, on average, taking into account all of the other variables, training factors, horses breeding, all of those things, there was no evidence of reduced performance in the ones that did make it to the races. If we look also at horses that presented with a stifle cyst at a 2-year-old sale, so horses that were deemed fit for sale as a 2-year-old, had made it through the breaking in process, had breezed up, had a cyst on their 2-year-old x-rays, all of those ones, the numbers were smaller, however all of those horses raced, and again there was no evidence of reduced performance. Just lastly on stifle cysts, there's one other special case to mention, and those are small cysts or lucencies, like this one here, just in a slightly different area within the condyle. So the classic cysts are down here. We do see these more axially located cysts. And quite nicely, this research showed that cysts in this location, there's no evidence of reduced performance. All of them, well actually, one horse didn't race, but part of the study was to get follow-up on horses that didn't race. And so the horse with one of these that didn't race was a filly that had an accident while she was being broken in, so nothing to do with its X-ray finding. And these also, we saw no new lesions in 2-year-olds for these, so this is not a finding that develops as the horse gets older and subsequently gets worse. It's a sort of a special case, but nice to have some hard evidence on these ones. So a summary on the Stifle findings, and I realise this is the Reader's Digest brief version, but a summary to recap some key points about stifles. The grade 1 and 2 lucencies showed no evidence of reduced performance. It's possible to improve 1 grade between sales, and approximately 20% of them get worse. Grade 3 cysts in yearlings are important. The chance of them not racing increases from 1 in 7 to 1 in 5. Grade 3 cysts in 2-year-olds may be less problematic than horses that have successfully breezed. And axial lucencies are a separate class, and those ones do not appear to affect performance at all. So that's a brief tour of the Stifle findings. We'll shift now to sesamoids. Particularly with sesamoids, this is the most common finding on yearling sales x-rays, and it's abnormalities in vascular channels in the sesamoids. So sesamoids, the two bones at the back of the fetlock, at the back of each fetlock there are these two bones, here and here. And if we look at them more closely on these oblique views, we'll often see these lines within the bone. These are the vascular channels. The sesamoid has a number of ways it can change radiologically. We'll see other things like this darker patch, which sort of looks like a bite out of the side of the bone. Other things we can see in sesamoids, fragments at the top of the bone or coming out of the side of the bone. But to vascular channels, as this is the key one, you may have heard the term sesamoiditis. This was a big reason for doing this research. So changes in the vascular channels have been looked at, graded differently over the years, and in developing a new grading system for them, we had the benefit of building on the previous work that had been done, including talking to those vets, asking them what they would do differently. This is the sort of study that you only do once and you want to get right. So we developed a new system for grading these vascular channels. Grade 1, any number of channels less than 2 millimetres wide. They're allowed to have slight enlargement at this margin, and there's specific measurements for vets to classify what constitutes enlargement. But essentially, grade 1 means the sesamoid has one enlarged vascular channel. Grade 2 is 2 enlarged, and grade 3 is 3 or more enlarged. So a measurable, specific, nice and clear, easy to interpret grading system. And then we also defined ways to grade other things, so production of new bone on the edge of the sesamoid. Again, this appearance where there's a bite out of the sesamoid or a concavity. And again, different types of fragments. So how common are these? So we looked at 20,000 yearling sesamoids and about 3,500 two-year-old sesamoids. 40% of horses had at least a grade 1 sesamoid. So almost half the horses on the complex will have a sesamoid where there's perhaps one enlarged vascular channel. To the more severe findings, grade 2, so 2 enlarged channels, we're getting down to sort of 16 to 10% of horses, and then the most severe, grade 3s, 5% of yearlings and 3% of 2-year-olds. Do they get better or worse between sales? For grade 1s in yearlings, the majority of these improved, and that's the vast majority, so 97% either improved, resolved to a grade 0, or remained a grade 1 by 2-year-old sales. So one enlarged vascular channel is really common in yearlings, and the majority of them improve by the time they're 2. Grade 2s, likewise, the majority of them improved, and a smaller proportion remained or worsened to a grade 3. Horses that started off with grade 2 or 3 sesamoids at yearlings, still a large proportion of them improved by the time they were at a 2-year-old sale. And then to speak briefly to another one of the findings, the one where they've got the big lucency on the side, the concavity there. This was a particular finding that we found was really common in medial fallen sesamoids and yearlings, and the vast majority either disappeared or were improved on x-rays by the time they were 2. There's more to it, but those are sort of some of the key points. Do they matter in terms of racing performance? Probably the biggest takeaway from this is that for grade 1 sesamoids, the answer to that is there's no evidence of reduced performance. And the beauty of that is that most horses that have sesamoid change, it's grade 1. So this is the most common finding. What hadn't been done before is that we hadn't specifically looked at one enlarged channel compared to 2 or more. So previously, when we'd been concerned about sesamoiditis, the work that had been done was, do they have 1 or more enlarged vascular channels? So essentially what we've done is shift the threshold of significance past 1, so one is acceptable, 2 or more, which are far less common, are the ones we need to look more closely at. Did we show anything that actually does significantly reduce performance? The answer to that is yes, for a few specific, more severe findings. So horses that have grade 3 sesamoids, if it's in a front leg, they had a reduced chance of racing at all, and for the ones that did race, they had fewer starts. If it's a grade 3 sesamoid in a hind limb, there was no difference to whether they raced or not, just that they had a delayed start to racing, so 54 days, a couple of months older at the time of their first race. Other findings that were significant, the production of new bone on the edge of the sesamoids in front legs reduced the chance of racing and resulted in lower total earnings and lower earnings per start. Also fragments in forelimb sesamoids, the large majority of which are the fragments off the side of the bone, the abaxial fragments, those also reduced the horse's chance of racing. So 2 things. What findings did we establish that don't matter? And then, of the findings that do matter, what grade is involved and what impact do they have? And actually, to speak to that, it's knowing the numbers, knowing how much of a reduction in probability it is, and also what the impact is. Because if it's a case of the horse might start later versus might not race at all, those are obviously things for individuals to take into account, and to take into account in your discussions with your own vet for how the evidence applies to your situation. So, summary of the sesamoid findings very briefly. There's a new way of grading the sesamoid findings. We moved away from the term sesamoiditis. It had become quite a blanket term for changes in the sesamoids and was causing a lot of controversy, particularly overseas. Now that we've got the evidence, it's much clearer if we're grading the vascular channels, commenting on any abaxial contour change, and steering away from the term sesamoiditis and the connotations that come with that, now that we have more evidence. Just to speak, I haven't touched much on grade 2 sesamoid changes, so there's a lot more work behind this, but essentially, grade 1s, no evidence of reduced performance. Grade 3s, in certain locations, yes, some importance to future racing performance. Grade 2s, there's sometimes a grey area where we would like more information. And these are the ones, and it's particularly common, had become quite common overseas, where scanning, ultrasounding the ligament that inserts onto the sesamoid gives you more information as to whether there is an issue or likely to be a clinical issue there. We also studied this, that's a whole other hour at least, so, but happy to speak more to that, but these are the ones where, and essentially for yearlings that have a grade 2 sesamoid, 30 or 33%, so a third of those will have change in the branch. If it's a 2-year-old with a grade 2 sesamoid, about half of those have change in the branch. So the reason for scanning is helpful. It gives us more information on both sides of the fence. So it lets us know actually the ligament looks okay, or it picks up the ones where the ligament may have an issue. So grade 2 is sort of an in-between. But that's a brief overview of some of the work that's gone on over the last few years. Probably my key message would be, what has this work done? It showed us that for stifles and for sesamoids, there are many low-grade common findings that don't have any evidence of affecting performance. And so perhaps we can be more forgiving on those, and that'll be a positive for everybody. It has also established which of the more severe findings do truly affect performance, and that's on the basis of looking at thousands of horses, taking into account all the other things that could influence performance. Really, is there an X-ray finding that still with all of those variables, still has an impact on whether the horse races or not? And the answer to that is yes. But that's a very small proportion of horses. If we think back to sort of those prevalence numbers, when we're looking at, for instance, grade 3 Stifle cyst, that was 1% of sales horses. Likewise, the grade 3 Sesamoids, low percentage of horses of ones that have findings that truly do have proven to affect performance. I can't talk about this without thanking the 616 vendors, so like many of you, who embraced our efforts in the States and willingly enrolled their horses in this work. They trusted us with their imaging information at real sales like this, trusted us with that information, and were incredibly supportive of us, sort of our efforts to try and get some more information for everyone on these things. So a big thank you to them. Likewise, the 2-year-old trainers and consigners in Florida, mostly, just as helpful. So without their massive participation, and also the other key members of our research group who aren't here today, Wayne McElrath, Chris Kowchak and Jeff Burke, we wouldn't have been able to put this data together. So yeah, years of input from a number of people to get to this point. There's years worth of more detail we could discuss, but that's a start for you, and I'll hand back to Nick and we can get into some discussion.
Well, thank you very much, Francis. I know it makes you uncomfortable, glossing over some of that detail, so thank you for doing it so succinctly. I guess maybe one for you, Dave. I know the headline numbers look good when when we talk about the number of horses and data that was analysed, but how confident can we be that this sample size will reflect reality? Have we sampled enough horses here, do you believe?
Well, I don't want to read any more. I don't want to read any more Sesamoid X-rays, that's for sure, Nick. So, this is the biggest X-ray project ever undertaken in thoroughbreds or in horses. 2,500, it's nearly double any previous effort. So, there's no doubt it's got the power, the numbers to do that. It was very far-reaching. These horses raced all over the globe, so it's not like we've just measured one population of horses in one area, one track, or not even one country or jurisdiction. So the breadth of that scope of those horses going all over the globe, racing on dirt, racing on turf, some going to ready-to-run sales or breeze-up sales, some going on and racing further in all over jurisdictions which we also serve, Asia, etc. That gives it the strength.
And obviously it was based in, or the findings are from North America. When we reference it, New Zealand and our key markets, does that, again, do the findings still apply both here in New Zealand and in the markets that we sell to?
Yeah, that's really valid. We believe so, and whilst it wasn't in New Zealand, it's in the markets which we serve. These horses went, as I said before, went to Hong Kong, went to Australia, they went to England, France, plus obviously the States. So they went far afield and worked under all different regimes. So we believe it does.
And I guess another thing to add, for those of you less familiar with the particularly 2-year-old sales process in the States, comparing that to here, I would say that it's a bit more of a pressure cooker, going from a yearling sale to a 2-year-old sale in the States. And that's for two reasons. One of which is just the calendar. It's a pretty short turnaround. From the September yearling sale in Lexington, Kentucky, the first 2-year-old sale is in Gulfstream on the 1st of March. So September to March, about 5 months. So it's a pretty quick turnaround. So it spans a few months. So the last 2-year-old sale that we looked at, these horses, was the June Ocala sale. So these horses in this study, some of them had a pretty tight turnaround, and also the other big thing is the importance that's placed on breeze time in the States. So going fast in the breeze really matters. So these horses are put under a fair amount of pressure. So findings that withstood that pressure in these horses, for instance, those grade 1 changes we were talking about, I think we can be pretty confident that they would withstand the process here as well. So, yeah, perhaps a bit of a difference there, but I think beneficial to, yeah.
And I think from a layman's perspective, I mean, I've certainly got the lowest IQ on this stage, and I might even give the whole room a nudge. But for me, I think you know one of the key things is this grading system, and I just want to ask firstly, how did you establish the grades? I mean, what was the sort of methodology behind what constituted a grade 1, grade 2, grade 3?
So. Yeah, sort of. I said before, we weren't starting from scratch. It was definitely a case of on the shoulders of those that have gone before you type thing. There were a couple of different existing grading scales to work with, but that was good in a sense that we looked through those and assessed sort of what wasn't working with those and what did vets need. To be more consistent about how they were grading them, so in terms of measuring the channels, how we defined what constituted widening of the channel at the end, things like that. It was clear that there was variability in how they were graded, and that was coming through in sort of vets' interpretation of changes, and so we wanted to develop something that could improve the consistency between vets. And we had to check that, first of all, between ourselves. So early on, before we read these 65,000 images, we tested agreement between ourselves. So the 5 researchers all read the same x-rays and then analysed statistically how well we matched up in applying the grading scale. So just to prove to ourselves, first of all, that it was a grading scale that could be uniformly applied. Yeah.
And okay, so given that, I mean, we've now established that a grade 1, 2, and 3, and from my sort of take on it, you know, grade 1 plays very little to no influence on racetrack ability. In the past, were we, you know, you talk about things like sesamoiditis and then things to do with the stifles. Have we basically up until now been saying prior to this research that what you're calling a grade 1 and what you're calling a grade 3 were all sort of bundled in the same? So everything was critiqued on the same level?
Yeah, certainly to speak to sesamoiditis, like it was sort of a catch-all dumping ground with any change, any x-ray finding on a sesamoid was sort of dumped into sesamoiditis and people reacted accordingly. So it sort of spooked a lot of, you know, the terminology because of the importance of the structure and what it does. So I guess we've really broken that down and broken it down into a small number of items and findings which have effects and a bunch of them which don't. So we've been able to define them a lot differently. And that grading system, particularly around the vascular channels, it's pretty simple if we can learn it, or I can learn it that quick. So it's, you know, it's something which is really repeatable, and that's one of the big advantages, because probably one of the challenges for the entire industry is the fair critique of the vets to say we're looking for consistency. And you know, this enables us to provide that with a pretty robust system for grading sesamoids, at least anyway.
And you're sorry, Francis, I'll ask Dave. You're very experienced, Dave. I don't want to throw age into the mix. I don't want a personal grievance against me, but you've had a lot of experience with this from this research, and looking at what you were doing 10 years ago. To boil it down to its simplest form, you'd probably be recommending more horses to buyers based on this research than you would have before.
Certainly it gives us facts to go on. You know, we've got good science behind these findings. This has got a lot of power, this study. So to enable to have facts there to back it up, to say we know this is what happens with these horses across a big number. So that gives you confidence to go and say, well, this finding, we know that, you know, this study's proven that 80% of these improve in 12 months, then that gives you strength to go back to people and give them science to base it on. And that's part of our role, is to provide the science into the industry and let people utilise that for their decision making.
I agree.
The improvements that have been in some of the findings between, say, a yearling and a 2-year-old, and it's probably pretty worthwhile information for some people in this room. How can we apply those improvements in the findings that were shown?
So yeah, I guess we've shown that we can see improvements in grade between yearling and 2-year-old sales. So probably we'd like to pass on that information to you, and perhaps that, I think that comes into trusting that yes, it's got a grade 1 change or it's got a grade 2 change, but we like the horse and we're going to take a punt on it, and actually chances are it's going to be one of these ones that looks better by the time it's 2. I do understand that, particularly for pinhooking, it's as much about what risk you think the next buyer is going to assign to it. So it's probably the onus is on all of us to sort of trust the findings and not take a bit more risk, but be comfortable that the risk probably is lower than we thought it might be. Because it's no good changing our risk assessment on one cohort of horses, say as yearlings, if people looking at buying 2-year-olds on 2 days' time are not going to be utilising that same information. So I don't know if I've answered that particularly well.
Yeah, no, you have, yeah. I mean, we could talk for a long time on all of this, but if you had to boil down, 1 or 2 absolute key takeaways and key findings from this research, what would they be?
Well, I think at the coalface for saying there's a bunch of things which we used to lump into sesamoiditis as a criteria and give it that term, and consequently there's some negative connotations around that, and we've really broken that down into a few things that matter and a whole bunch of things which don't matter. So I think that's one of the big take homes, and the same applies to the Stifle lucencies. You know, we've all had plenty of spooky experiences with a Stifle lucency, and terms like pre-cystic lesions and things like that. Like, they're tough work because that implies it's going to become something worse. We're now saying that we can define these again with a pretty repeatable, measurable, accurate grading system, and we know from big numbers how those behave, and the fact that we're going to get 80% improve and 20% might go the other way. So that gives the buyer then some stats to go, okay, 1 out of 5 of these is going to go the wrong way, 4 out of 5 is going to go the right way.
And I think just popped into my head just then, just to emphasise that these findings, these results are for what the x-rays look like at the sales time. So this is if you're having a horse vetted, it's yearling sale x-rays, and we see these findings, these are what they mean. We're not talking about what the x-rays look like at screening sort of 6 months prior. That's sort of the potential for change, sort of what we've got at yearling sale, what's the evidence that vets can apply vetting horses at the sales for yearlings and for 2-year-olds. Those are the things that are, it had to be specific to horses that deemed fit for sale, presented at sale, they have these findings on their x-rays, what do they mean? Yeah.
And I guess finally, you know, you boil it all back down, and there's perhaps a question that may exist that I'll ask. Would you even carry out x-rays?
Same.
So it seems to be all good to me.
Great question.
I can't answer this one the right way, can I?
It's severely impactful.
You know, the reality is what we're doing is that at the end of the day, the industry demands what it wants, and if buyers and purchasers and people want x-rays, then yes, we'll x-ray them, and then it's our obligation then to apply the science, and so we're applying some science and giving us some facts to interpret those with.
Francis?
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, if nothing in these results had changed that 85% number, like if 85% of yearlings at the sale made it to the races, irrespective of any X-ray findings, then I guess you could argue why bother X-ray at all. But with thousands of horses, we've shown that yes, there are a select few more severe findings for these two anatomic locations that do impact performance. So it's worth knowing about for those horses in terms of their management. And equally, perhaps as a vendor or as someone presenting the product to the sales, I guess X-rays without those findings are a way of giving an assurance, giving confidence to people that the horse doesn't have those. So, which I guess, to go back to the very start, the purpose of X-ray repositories was to increase confidence in the marketplace and be a positive thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, I think what we'll do now is we'll get Scotty Buchanan on the roving mic situation if there's any questions from the audience. And I just want to caveat it, if we could just keep the questions specific to this research. I don't want to spiral down and ask a vet hole or why Dave castled a golden slipper winner or something like that 10 years ago. So please ask questions if anybody's got questions, and these two fine people will be happy to answer them. So does anybody...
Thanks for your time, guys. Very insightful. I know you did a lot of work on all the X-ray findings and things. Was there any variance in management practices for horses that improved in grade between sales?
That's a great question, Max. Yes. So again, because of the numbers in the study, because we had thousands of horses, there were variances in management practice for basically horses across the board. So the way they were prepped for the 2-year-old sale, the way they were prepped for the yearling sale even, but because we had such a large cross-section of different vendors and different management practices, the way it's analysed sort of takes into account those differences. To your question specifically about did the ones that improved, were they managed differently? The one no to, I mean, the 80% of horses with grade 1 vascular channels that became grade 0, those yearlings, I mean, that's the bulk of the horses, and so there's a massive cross-section in the way those are managed. So I truly don't think that comes down to management practices. That's sort of a maturation thing of the horse, of what's perhaps a normal or acceptable finding for the horse as a yearling, and as they mature, irrespective of quite how they're managed, providing it's within reason, they've improved. I would say to your question about management practices, regarding the finding with hind limb grade 3 sesamoids, the finding, the result as to how those affected performance was a 54-day delay in starting their first race. I do think, we've discussed this, and I think there's a fair chance that comes down to management practice. So those horses have been identified on sales X-rays as having that finding, and probably the delay is probably most likely due to management practices, so they've been given more time. Yeah.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Francis. I very much, as those in this room will know, I'm an amateur buyer, but you know, we talk to your vets and get your advice, etc. But what I read out of this is, whereas in a grade 1, particularly grade 2 in the past, a lot of buyers might say, oh, can that, it's too big a risk, but now 80-20 there's a chance they're going to come right. Buying's a risk game, and what you're enhancing is the fact that a lot of these horses actually can improve and come right over time. Yeah, and I've taken that out of this. Yeah.
That's what we were hoping you would take out of it. Thank you, David. But that's exactly right. It's just evidence the evidence hasn't been there before because we haven't looked at it. So, yeah, I'm pleased you were listening.
Thanks, guys. I was just wondering, in terms of this grading system, how has it been accepted throughout veterinary practice, and are there other, are all the vets using this system now in New Zealand and Australia, or is there still going to be variation between what vets you're using, or have you all got together, or how does that work between clinics, etc.?
Thanks, Kerry. Good question, and look, it sort of hits the money really as far as where we need to take this. The papers have only recently been published. Francis is presenting in the States at the AAEP 2 weeks' time. They're only just getting out there, basically, the information. They're widely available for all the vets, and I guess, I think our fraternity in this country anyway are pretty enthusiastic about taking on and sharing information. We've got a pretty thorough process around that. So all of the Equine Vet Association were emailed about tonight's presentation. There's plenty of our colleagues here tonight, which is great. The papers were sent out to all the Equine Vet Association members as well this week. There is the annual breakfast meeting, which is before the yearling sales. Part of the process of tonight was seeing if we could pull off a vet meeting as well. But it's only the charlatan sales vets that are here, so all the rest of the guys are back doing the grunt at the farm. So certainly that's the ambition. The first step is probably just these things, getting it out there, getting the information out there. The papers are published. It's to sit down and read 4 papers is no mean feat. There's probably 4 or 5 hours reading, or at my speed 7 or 8 hours reading, and taking a bit to digest it and then start using it. But certainly that's the aim, that there's the uniformity of using it.
And perhaps for those of you that are here, we could have your help. Going to the trouble of doing the research is the first step, but having it applied, well, first of all, having the awareness that the research is now out there. We've spent years on this, and I'm not sick of talking about it yet. So if you have the discussion with your vet and they're not aware of it, we're available and happy to talk more about it. Yeah.
Yeah, hi. Hind leg sesamoid fractures or fragments, I take it they weren't significant?
Great question. That's correct. And the difference with fragments in hind limb sesamoids is that the large majority of those are the apical fragments, so those fragments at the very top of the sesamoid. And we looked at those, whether or not some of those are operated prior to the sale, so removed, and some of them were still present on sales x-rays. So hind limb fragments, the vast majority of those are those small fragments at the top of the sesamoid, and you're correct, those did not show any association with reduced performance. The fact that fragments in front forelimb sesamoids did relates to 2 things. The first of which is that the fragments in the forelimb sesamoids are usually, there are some apical fragments, but most of them are abaxial, sort of off the side of the sesamoid. And secondly, when we broke down sesamoids that had fragments, what changes did they also have in the vascular channels? It was far more common for forelimb sesamoids with fragments to also have grade 2 or 3 enlarged vascular channels, whereas fragments in hind sesamoids were largely small fragments just off the top of the bone, and correct, had no impact on racing performance.
Hi. With those 2,500 horses that you studied, was that global, or was that mostly in America?
Yeah, so those 2,500 all actually came from the one sale. So those were, it was the 2016 Keeneland September yearling sale. So planned it all beforehand, went to that specific sale. Every vendor at that sale had a letter from the sales company asking them whether they would consider enrolling their horses in this study. And so all of those 2,508 yearlings were from that particular Keeneland sale. So they came from across North America and Canada, and a few from Europe, from overseas. But yeah, the starting point to enter this study was that you had to be a yearling at the Keeneland September Sale. Yeah, subsequently, many of those went on to race overseas, but that's sort of the niche that we caught them in to start with.
Quite proud. Good.
Brilliant. Well, look, I guess as we alluded to at the start, that's a whistle-stop tour really of what is, I think, very, very important piece of research, and I just want to thank Francis and Dave for giving up their time here tonight and just creating a bit of awareness, and I think that's what needs to happen. I think, like I said at the start, the notion is out there that this is just for vets and this just applies to vets, but I think because it's going to benefit everybody, buyers, it's going to let them not have as many horses that they like cancelled off because of a vetting process. It's obviously going to help the vendors to sell more horses, and we can't sugarcoat the fact. I don't think I've been in this job for 12 months and noticed that there has been a significant portion of breeders have stopped breeding because of the frustrations or the risk that they see they have to take based on what happens when their horse gets x-rayed at sales time. So we need to keep breeding the numbers of horses in New Zealand to the exceptional level and ability that we do, and also it's a cold hard reality that in order to keep our domestic racing scene healthy and going and in this positive state, we need the field sizes to reflect that, and it doesn't take a smart man, because I'm certainly not one, to work out that we need to breed horses in order to do that. So that's what I'd encourage. As I say, thank you so much, guys, and this is not the last time that we'll do something like that. We've got things in the pipeline for the next couple of months, and thanks for everyone that's turned up here today. I hope you've taken a few pearls of wisdom with you, those that are watching online too, and look, let's spread the word and make sure that this factual and science-based information that took 8 years to come up with and provided results that we should be able to sell more horses off. Let's get that out there, and if we can, that'll be a very positive thing. So thank you, everyone. The bar will still be open. Francis and Dave will be around to have one-on-one chats, and good luck for the sale. So thank you very much. Cheers.
Thank you.